USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the Weekend Review podcast, December 2nd, 2018. I'm Ed Trefzger, joined by Dan Rubin, sitting in for Jimmy Connolly. And thanks for sitting in, Dan.
Hey, pleasure to be wrapping up the week with you, Ed. I'm excited to dive into this with you.
Well, it was a pretty good weekend of hockey. Let's start with what was our game of the week. A pair of games, home and home, Michigan State and Michigan at Michigan State on Friday and at Yost Ice Arena on Saturday. Michigan State took 5 of 6 points in this big rivalry and, more importantly, a pair of Big Ten games.
Yeah, they they really put some wood onto Michigan in such a way too that they were outshot. I know pretty badly. I think they gave up 80 odd shots or pushing 89, 85, 90 shots allowed by Michigan. And for whatever reason, the puck seemed to bounce the right way for Sparty, and they walked away with the right goal at the right time. Walked away with that 4-3 win on Friday, and then turned around and picked up the tie on Saturday, which. I'm sure that feels good for them to pull 5 points out of their hated rival.
Yeah, I mean, Danton Cole has things moving in the right direction for Michigan State, and I know it was a big disappointment for Mel Pearson. He expressed after the game on Saturday night sort of the anger almost in the locker room for his team. It had to be very disappointing there.
Yeah, I think given the way when you look at Michigan and you look at it's the way some of the things have gone for them this year, they opened up and they were pretty hot. They swept St. Lawrence and they picked up those wins against Lake Superior and Notre Dame. And after they split with Penn State, they were starting to look like at least have the ball rolling. And since that 6-4 win against Penn State, they haven't won a game. They've got the ties, they've got the overtime win, and the 3-on-3 against Wisconsin. But they're coming in and officially their record, 6-6-3 overall to the national record is not what I think they would have expected given some of the ways that they were playing last month.
And they felt like they're a team, they still do probably feel like they're a team that should be back in the Frozen Four, and certainly came away with that disappointed.
Yeah, I think, at any time you deal with that layer of disappointment and you're coming in the next year, there's going to be some type of letdown, just at least at the start. But thought had overcome it, and I think that's a natural thing that happens to any team. I'm not picking on them or saying anything bad about them in that regard. And I think thought they felt like they were overcoming it. I obviously don't know them personally if they did, but they're going to hit this break time after next weekend. I think at the right time. They have to get through these games against Minnesota next weekend, try to pick up some points, try to pick up some wins in there, and then get into the break, come out in the second half, and see if the rest will do them some good. Well,
let's turn to the ECAC. It was a good home and home matchup this weekend with Quinnipiac and Princeton. And Ron Fogarty has really turned around the Tigers since he came there from Division III Adrian. They were the upstart to win the ECAC championship last year. And meanwhile, Quinnipiac for Rand Pecknold is coming off of what was the only sub-500 season that he has had since becoming the head coach at Quinnipiac. But it was a big sweep for the Bobcats, and I would expect to see them jump up a bit in the polls on the heels of that.
Yeah, Quinnipiac, they're a machine when I think back over the last few years and what Rand Pecknold's been able to do down there in Hamden. I've had a front row seat to see it through the years, and they're a team that just wins hockey games every year, it seems like. So when they went under 500 last year, I was a little surprised. And I mean, I'm sure if you look back and you say, well, this guy and that guy, this guy was here, this guy wasn't, that type of thing, you'd be able to figure it all out. But they've really been hitting the gas pedal. And this weekend they scored 9 goals against Princeton, shut out the Tigers on Friday night 3-0. A good weekend for the Bobcats rather. And it's the only time you're going to play a team when you play a travel partner. It's the only time in ECAC that you play a team back to back. And it's always the team that you tend to know the most about. And so for Quinnipiac, they come out of that weekend. They round out conference play in the first half, 6-2. They're a very, very good hockey team, and I think it goes without saying that this weekend they're in position to really jump into these standings and jump into the national picture in a huge way.
Something that I've been wanting to ask an ECAC coach for a while and didn't get a chance to when we had Rick Bennett on our Spotlight podcast last week is what it's like as an ECAC coach each weekend having to prepare for two teams, because you play the travel partners, and so it'll be a different team on Friday and Saturday. You've got twice the amount of video to deal with, twice the amount of preparation for systems. I wonder how much that affects the ECAC. It averages out because everybody in the league has to do it, but I wonder how much that affects them, and maybe how it affects them when it gets to be the postseason.
Well, and you get in the ECAC too, and you get into those travel partners, the road trips typically aren't horrible. I know that the second trip, Friday to Saturday, if you're playing at Harvard on Friday, you have to play at Dartmouth on Saturday. And it can be tough if you're not careful. I know that personal experience with Brown, Cornell, and Colgate was always a trip that they historically struggled with a lot. And if you go back over the last 30 or 40 years, they did not win a ton of games on that road trip. But the Quinnipiac Princeton trip is actually one of the toughest ones, especially if you have to play at Princeton on Saturday. And it's more, I don't know so much about the film side of it. I haven't really talked to anybody about the film side of it, but I know from the travel side of it, and I know this just from personal, if you have to play at Quinnipiac on Friday and you're a team like Harvard, and then you have to turn around and go out to Princeton on Saturday and then double back. So those last couple of hours, if you play a nice physical game on Friday, one of those games that's, a 1-goal game and you have to lay it all on the line, it becomes tougher. I don't think anybody would be able to dispute that. I know the league does a good job of mitigating having to go too far on the second night wherever possible. And I remember talking to Steve Hagwell in the summer about that. So if you're at St. Lawrence and Princeton, St. Lawrence and Clarkson one weekend, they typically have lucked out and not made you go on a 6-hour bus trip the next weekend. But at the same time, it's definitely a challenge in there, especially because if you're playing 2 road games, you have to get on the bus. And like you said, it averages out, but it's still not easy.
Well, you make a good point about Quinnipiac and Princeton. 2 hours and 43 minutes says Google Maps in between, though. That's like RIT to Mercyhurst. That's quite a haul, like Rochester to Erie. Meanwhile, if you're playing Clarkson and St. Lawrence on a weekend, you stay in the same hotel somewhere in between or in one or the other. It's only 10 miles apart.
Yeah, the capital district's like that too with RPI and Union. I think it's the exact same distance north and south to go to Schenectady versus Troy and stay out in Albany and kill some time watching the planes land out at the airport in the afternoon rather than have to run back and forth. The road trips are just I used to really like getting out on the road and being able to go on those trips because I used to love seeing some of the scenery. But I'm sure if you do it every week, you don't have the same opinion of it than I do.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have a different opinion after having to do back-to-back trips to New England twice in the second part of the season, but we'll save that for another time. Back to the games this weekend. North Dakota had a split with Minnesota-Duluth. Duluth number 2 in last week's poll. The Fighting Hawks have been up and down this season, so getting the split for them over Minnesota-Duluth was a big deal.
Yeah, and especially because Minnesota-Duluth has been rolling this year. I think when you look at the top of the national rankings, some of those teams you see, they got 2 losses. This team has 1, so the 1-loss team might need to be ranked over them. And Minnesota-Duluth has just been rolling. I know they went into this weekend with just a couple of losses on the year and playing a North Dakota team that knows them very well. North Dakota, even though they're up and down, when you get into conference play, you're playing teams that you've seen a lot of, and that means that they can come out and beat you, which is what Western Michigan did, but you could just as easily go out and beat them. And that's what they did with Miami earlier this year. And that's what they did against Duluth this past weekend. And, North Dakota did a really good job of rallying after losing 5-0 on Friday. That's 4-goal second period. They gave up a couple goals in less than a minute down the stretch there. Duluth scored, I think, twice in 35 seconds or 37 seconds, I think was the official number. And then North Dakota turns around, takes a 2-0 lead in the first period and used that to hold on through the second and third. That's a good win moving forward. I'm sure they would have liked to have had, both victories, but still a good weekend for them against a team that doesn't really need much introduction nationally.
There sounds like there's a little bit of restlessness with North Dakota fans with Brad Berry, which I think is completely misplaced. I became a big fan of Brad, seeing him in action when North Dakota won the national championship in his first year behind the bench.
It's kind of funny how if you win a national championship first year, I'm sure he wouldn't have to buy a dinner anywhere in Grand Forks, so to speak, and now you're 8-6-1 and under 500 in the first 6 games in the conference, and they're getting restless. I think that's the a football coach I once talked to had said to me, "So what have you done for me lately?" type of industry, and the pressure's always on with North Dakota. And you're right, I tend to agree with you. I don't know that I'm not going to sit here and say that I agree one way or the other, but I would tend to agree with you. I think end of the season, North Dakota might. Who knows? They could come out and they go gangbusters in the second half of the season, and all of a sudden everyone's in love with them again.
And I've talked to a few coaches around the NCHC, and the problem with that league is also what makes it so good. Somebody has to come in at the bottom and miss the postseason in the NCAA, and it's a league made up of teams that would be in the upper half of every other conference. So you're going to have a down year even if you're a very good team.
Yeah, and somebody has to miss the national tournament then, which I guess they got the model down pat, and they do. So that's the power conference mentality that you could be one of the very best teams in the country, and if you're just happen to lose the games in your league against some of the other very best teams in the country, you're sitting at home and brushing up the clubs on national tournament weekends.
This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Well, as we continue here on USCHO Weekend Review, normal years, most years, BC-BU would be a matchup between two ranked teams. Friday night, BC goes on the road, gets an empty net goal late, and a 4-1 win over the Terriers. But it was historic on Saturday.
Yeah, first time there has ever been a scoreless tie in the history of BCBU. And we're going back 100-something matchups, and this was the first time that it was a 0-0 final. And I don't know if that's something that everybody is sitting back and smiling about. I'm sure that that's not going to sit well, I guess, with the teams. There were a ton of scoring opportunities, especially for BC. 42 shots on the BU net and just unable to crack it. And BC went 0 for 3 on the power play during the scoreless game after going 1 for 3 in the win. BU 0 for 1 rather than the night before. BU went 1 for 3 in the loss, and BU went 0 for 4 on the power play on Saturday. So scoreless tie in the Green Line rivalry.
Well, in just one game for UMass, a 7-4 win over UConn. But as we look forward to Monday's poll, I would have to think that with a couple of ties for St. Cloud State, at least ties in the books for NCAA purposes at Miami, that UMass is going to make some noise and might just eke its way past number 3 and number 2 to even the number 1 spot.
But they look good in that win this weekend, didn't they? When they beat UConn on Friday with 7 goals, a 7-4 win, and you consider that UMass is rolling, and I know that they snuck up on me. I know that. I don't know if they snuck up on everyone else like this, but it is it's been a real pleasure to see what they're putting together out there. We're getting a couple of different teams getting active in the polls like this, and you're always sitting here wondering, as the Western teams were at the top of the poll, who's the team from the East that's going to come out? The BCs and BUs have been struggling. Maybe it'll be Providence, and then out of this mist, comes the Minutemen, and they are just a wagon right now. I mean, they've got what, one loss on the season, the only one coming back against Ohio State. And I think in a hockey season, if you're a one-loss team, you're as good as any team that would have been undefeated. So they are rolling, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see them atop the polls once it's released on Monday. And if they are, that is well-deserved, and a well-deserved congratulations for them if that happens.
And just to give some perspective, the last time they were in the polls at all, Jonathan Quick was their goaltender.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure my we don't have to talk about my grade point average back in those days.
Okay, well, we'll move on to some off the ice stuff. Well, on and off the ice stuff. And it was a press release that came out early Wednesday evening from Atlantic Hockey when 6 players were suspended from Mercyhurst and Robert Morris combined. And I did have a chance yesterday to talk briefly off the record with Atlantic Hockey Commissioner Bob DiGregorio. I will mention that he was still very upset about what happened, and also that memos were sent out across the league about how this sort of thing is just unacceptable. But let me skim from the press release, and then we can talk about this. I know both of us have some strong opinions on it. So on Wednesday, Atlantic Hockey announced several supplemental discipline suspensions stemming from the Robert Morris versus Mercyhurst game, which was on Saturday, November 24th. From Robert Morris, Jeff Lawson, Nick Perkusic, and Alex Tonge got suspensions, and Mercyhurst Taylor Best, Joseph Duzak, and Michael Bevilacqua also will be out for a game, and they served that over the weekend. Lawson and Best each got 5-minute majors and game misconducts in Saturday night's contest. And after reviewing video, Atlantic Hockey determined another game was warranted. It should have been a disqualification, in other words. Don't have a problem with that. That kind of stuff happens all the time. In fact, I give Atlantic Hockey kudos for stepping up that when it needs to happen.
Yeah, no, I'm on board with you. I know that I believe that if you are whistled for a major, that there is then an automatic review, and they have to send the clip in to review that with the league. Don't quote me on that.
No, I could be wrong. You're correct.
Okay.
On that.
So I appreciate that when a referee makes a call and it's a contact to the head major, which is something that is a point of emphasis in hockey, or a bad play, that they're automatically going to review it, and they should. So I'm not gonna disagree with that. I think that's something that Atlantic Hockey does a very good job of, and those plays are going to happen throughout the year. So they do a good job of litigating those as they happen. I mean, there's not much more you can ask for in that situation.
Yeah, the referees got it right. Now, the next set of suspensions came as a result of additional review of plays during the game. Teams send clips into the league. Okay, so Duzak was whistled for a boarding minor, but upon further review, the play should have been a major for checking from behind and a game misconduct. So he sat on Friday when Mercyhurst was at Bentley. Similarly, his teammate Michael Bevilacqua was called for an elbowing minor, which should have been a contact to the head major. Bevilacqua was also suspended on Friday. And then there was a confrontation late in the first period. Perkusic was called for a checking from behind minor. They reviewed the clip, and it was found that during the altercation, he made contact 3 separate times with the same Mercyhurst player, the last of which drove him headfirst into the boards, which should have been a major in a game misconduct. So he was suspended for 2 games and missed the series this past weekend against Sacred Heart. Okay. Let me go on to the last one, because that's the icing on the cake. Lastly, Alex Tonge was not whistled for a penalty for the play in question, but after reviewing the submitted clip, the Atlantic Hockey office found that a contact to the head major should have been called. So a guy who got no penalty should have been called for a major and sat for a game against Sacred Heart. I also understand that only 3 of 5 video replay cameras were available at the arena, but I think there are some problems in a number of areas. But first, I want to start out with what gets called and what's going on with officiating. And I don't mean to particularly pick on any crew in general, but what is being expected and what's being called. And I got in some Twitter conversation about this over the weekend also. And one thought I have that I agree with a person who was talking to me on Twitter is that if you are not calling the stuff that should be called, and I'm talking about some of the obstruction type stuff, some holding, little stick work, maybe slashes, which are supposed to be emphasized this year, then things start to get a little bit heated up. And then you get to the point where the game starts to get a little out of control and the players start to take things into their own hands, and you start to see this kind of retaliation. So I think it all starts with what kind of tone is set at the beginning. That said, there's no excuse for the players making head contact because that's just that has no part in the game these days. But I think there are some questions we have to ask, and one of them, which I know we talked about a little bit before we hopped on, is what's the effect of video? Are officials relying too much on video to try to confirm whether something should be a 2-minute or a 5-minute? The video can be used for that. But if you're not making the call and you're relying on that, are you going to miss some things if then the video is not conclusive?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bang bang game, right? I mean, it's a fast game. It's the fastest game on earth. Everything happens in a short amount of time, and you have 4 guys on the ice who are genuinely trying to manage the game and keep it clean, keep it moving. And I think by and large, they do a good job. They're also human, so they're going to make errors at some point, whether it's a missed offsides or a missed call behind the play, because you have people moving very quickly and it's a very emotional game, and things are going to get missed. I think that is part of it. So when you go back, if you start, trying to look for what was there, it makes it a very confusing and dicey situation with too much video, because video can give you pretty much everything. So I think video is great to have for reviewing the goals, reviewing some of the different things that are in there. But there is an element where something's going to get missed along the way, and it'll even itself out. What you hope is that it doesn't turn into a schmoz, is the term that I use, where it's just everybody hitting and they're worried, go to the fights and a hockey game breaks out, right, type thing. I think that you can manage that as an official, and I'd like to think that a lot of the officials in Atlantic hockey and in the country are able to do that. So I feel bad when something like this happens, because it's an unfortunate situation for all parties involved on both sides, whether you're a coach, whether you're a player, whether you're an official, whether you're a league. A league definitely doesn't want to have to be releasing a press release where they're suspending 6 guys because it makes it look like you're playing a game in Slapshot. A coach doesn't want to lose 3 guys from his roster, though I saw firsthand that Mercyhurst was able to overcome that on Friday. You don't want to be a player who does something on the ice and then has to second guess, and you don't want to be an official who's second guessing what you're doing. So it's a really confusing, dicey situation. I don't know that there's ever going to be a right or a wrong answer for it. Video is here, whether we like it or not. But I think you're right. There is probably a piece of it where you can actually get into too much of it.
Well, I want to agree with you on one thing. Things are going to get missed, and that's the way it goes. You've got 4 guys out there. 2 are worried about the lines and icing and so forth, and 2 of them are trying to watch 200 by 85 of activity. So obviously some things are going to get lost. What I'm concerned about is when things are tolerated, when a certain level, it's like, okay, that didn't rise to a certain level, we're going to let that go. Okay, there's a little grab there, there's a hold there, there's a holding the stick. That was a slash, but maybe that wasn't that bad. When that starts to happen, then things accelerate. Now, I don't know that people are saying, okay, well, we're going to let this stuff go. But what happens is possibly, and this is what's being conjectured by some people, is that when you have a point of emphasis on a slash or a contact to the head, that starts to become what's being watched for, because they don't want to miss that. And then some of the other stuff gets let go. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I see games where things like holding, hooking, sticks getting up around anybody, that's supposed to be called very closely this year. And I see games where that's called closely and teams play in such a way as to avoid those calls. But I've seen other games this season, and not just in one league, but officials from 3 different leagues where sometimes that stuff is let go and the nature of the game devolves into what we used to see 15 years ago. And then players start getting heated when stuff doesn't get called. And then you get retaliation or you get misconducts for being potty mouthed or whatever. And so those are the things that concern me, not the missed calls, but when there is a level set that allows things to happen that shouldn't.
And what I guess makes it so tough is we try to analyze things at a high level, right? We try to look at it and say we're going to emphasize high sticking, or we're going to emphasize clutch and grab, or we're going to emphasize hooking or cross checking or whatever's in the game. But then you go into a game and you can have on a case by case basis a game where some of that stuff happens and you have to let it and you choose to let it go because the teams are, and I'm not saying reputation calls or anything like that, but you're in a situation where teams are playing hard and they're fighting hard and it's a really good hockey game, and you know the game is moving along at a great flow, and there's just a little bit of the Chucky stuff, as I call it, a little pushing and shoving, maybe a face wash or two after a play, and then you get right back to the action, and that's totally fine, and you wind up with a great college hockey game. But then on the flip side, and this again isn't specific to Atlantic hockey, this isn't specific, this is more to the game, the point of the game. And then you have another one where players, you could have the same 2 teams in the exact same situation, lose their mind and start, throwing down after a scrum in front of the crease. So I don't know that there's a right answer. I wish there was. I wish that there was some magic wand that we could all wave on it, but I know that it's not, the conversation is not going to go away, and every time it comes up, it's just gonna intensify for the next one.
And this is about officiating in general in all levels in all sports. It's getting more and more difficult. I will give the Rules Committee and the NCAA credit for getting training materials out there, and I know the supervisors of officials from the 6 leagues meet during the season, stay in contact, want to do proper training. Hopefully some of these things can work themselves out. But in general, for the good of the game, I really hope that the penalties that cause the game to, or the infractions that cause the game to slow down get called. Because when that was really emphasized at first, it didn't take long and the game opened up. And I think right now the NHL is doing a better job on making sure that the game is free-flowing than NCAA Division I is. Well,
I got nothing. You have silenced me. That is the first time I think in recorded history that's happened.
Well, we'll leave it right there then. And coming up this week, you'll also be filling in for Jim Conley, and we'll have USCHO Spotlight and also the USCHO Game of the Week podcast coming up on Thursday. Preview of that, it's going to be Quinnipiac and UMass, and we look forward to that. For Dan Rubin, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.